The rain poured heavily that night, drumming against the windows of a lavish penthouse that overlooked the city skyline. Inside, Damien Carter sat on the edge of a sleek leather couch, his mind a tangled mess of regret and disbelief. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through an email that had just landed in his inbox. The words blurred before his eyes, but the message was clear. It was about her, the woman he had left behind 7 years ago, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had abandoned because she couldn't give him a child. Damien had always been a man who got what he wanted. Growing up in a wealthy family, he was used to success, power, and control. By the time he turned 35, he had built an empire from scratch, turning a small investment firm into a multi-million-dollar corporation. He had the cars, the mansion, the status, everything a man could dream of. And he had Olivia, his beautiful, devoted wife. At first, their love was something out of a fairy tale. She had been with him through it all, supporting him when he was just starting out, standing by his side when times were tough. But in Damien's world, love was not enough. As years passed and they remained childless, Damien's patience began to wear thin. Every doctor's visit ended the same way. Olivia couldn't conceive. The words felt like a death sentence to him. He wanted a son, an heir to carry on his legacy. He wanted to be a father. And when the doctors confirmed that the issue was with Olivia, not him, something inside him shifted. His love turned to resentment. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, became a cold, silent place. Olivia tried everything: fertility treatments, holistic therapies, even considering adoption. But Damien wouldn't hear of it. He wanted his own blood, his own legacy. And so, one evening without warning, he made a decision that changed everything. "I can't do this anymore," he told her. His voice was void of emotion, as if he were negotiating a business deal. Olivia stood frozen, her eyes glistening with tears. "Damien, please, I've made up my mind." He cut her off. "I need a family, a real family. And you can't give me that." The divorce was swift and brutal. Olivia didn't fight. She packed her bags and left without a word, vanishing from his life as if she had never been there. Within a year, Damien had moved on. He married a younger woman, Sophia, who seemed to fit perfectly into the role of his future children's mother. But as time went on, something strange happened. Years passed, and still there were no children. Doctors' visits, tests, second opinions, all of them led to one undeniable truth. The problem had never been Olivia. It had been him all along. Damien's world cracked. The foundation of his beliefs, his choices, his marriage, everything he had built, it was all based on a lie. The irony was suffocating. But by the time he realized it, it was too late. Olivia was gone, and he had no idea where she was. Until tonight. The email was brief, sent from an anonymous account, but the contents shook him to his core. "She has a son." Damien's breath caught in his throat. He read the words over and over, his heart pounding. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. And yet, deep inside, a terrifying thought took root. What if it was true? Somewhere out there, Olivia had moved on, and she had a child that might have been his. Damien's hands shook as he set his phone down. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. Olivia had a child, the woman he had left behind, the woman he had believed to be infertile, had a son. Questions swarmed in his head, each one more unbearable than the last. Had she lied to him? Had she known all along that she could have children? Or was the child someone else's? The thought of Olivia with another man, building a life, starting a family, his family, made his chest tighten with something he couldn't quite name. Was it regret, jealousy, or something much worse? He needed answers. The next morning, he made a call to one of his old contacts, a private investigator who had worked for him in the past. Within hours, Damien had an address. Olivia was living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, far from the high-rise luxury they once shared. The idea of her in a modest home, living a simple life, felt strange. She had once loved the finer things, hadn't she? Or had he just assumed that about her? That evening, Damien found himself parked outside her house, gripping the steering wheel as he tried to calm his nerves. Through the softly lit window, he saw her, Olivia. She looked different, happier, somehow, more at peace. She wasn't alone. A little boy, no older than 6 or 7, ran into the room, his laughter filling the air. Damien felt his stomach drop. The boy had his eyes. His breath came short, his mind refusing to accept what his heart already knew. This wasn't just any child. This was his own son. For a moment, Damien couldn't move. His entire life had been defined by control, controlling his business, his relationships, his future. But this was beyond him. He had walked away from Olivia, believing she could never give him a child, only to find out he had abandoned his own flesh and blood. His knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. How had this happened? Had Olivia known she was pregnant when she left? Had she hidden it from him out of spite? As he sat there, watching a life that could have been his mind drifted back to the day he had let her go. She hadn't begged. She hadn't argued. She had simply left, carrying his child, without ever looking back. Why? The need for answers consumed him. He had to see her. He had to know the truth. The next morning, Damien waited outside a small cafe near Olivia's neighborhood. His heart pounded when he saw her walk in, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her movements graceful and unhurried. She looked different, stronger, as if the years apart had rebuilt her into someone new. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. She didn't notice him at first. She ordered her coffee, waiting patiently by the counter. But when she turned, her eyes met his, and for a split second, time stopped. Her face paled, her fingers tightening around her cup. There was no anger in her expression, no resentment, just quiet shock. "Damien," she breathed, as if saying his name confirmed that this moment was real. "Olivia," he said, his voice hoarse. They stood there, frozen in the weight of unspoken words. Years of silence stretched between them, filled with everything he had never said, everything he had never known. She was the first to break the tension. "What are you doing here?" "I saw your son," he said bluntly. "Our son." A flicker of something crossed her face. Pain maybe, or fear. But she didn't deny it. She didn't try to lie. Instead, she exhaled softly and nodded. "Yes," she said simply. "He's yours." Damien felt his world shift beneath his feet. He had been prepared for denial, for anger, for excuses. But not this. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was quieter now, almost fragile. Olivia's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, her gaze dropping to the table. "Because you didn't want me. You wanted a perfect wife who could give you a perfect life. And the moment I didn't fit that picture, you erased me." Her words cut deep because they were true. He had been so blinded by his obsession with an heir that he had thrown away the woman who had loved him. And in doing so, He had walked away from the very thing he had always wanted. "I didn't know," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I didn't know you were pregnant." "I found out after the divorce," Olivia said, her voice steady. "I thought about telling you, but then I asked myself, why? Would you have even wanted him? Or would you have resented him the way you resented me?" Damien swallowed hard. He wanted to say that he would have been there, that he would have been a father, but deep down he wasn't sure. The man he had been back then, the man who had let her walk away, would he have truly loved this child? Or would he have seen him as just another reminder of what Olivia could never give him? In the past, "I was selfish," he admitted. "I was cruel." "Yes," she agreed, no hesitation in her voice. "You were." Silence stretched between them again, but this time, it was filled with something different. "You don't get to walk in here, after all these years, and claim him," Olivia said softly but firmly. "He doesn't know you. He has a life, a good one." Damien's chest ached. His son had a life that didn't include him. "But I want to know him," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I want to fix this." Olivia studied him for a long moment, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that terrified him more than anger or hatred. Doubt. "You don't get to fix something you broke just because it suddenly matters to you," she said. "This isn't about you anymore, Damien. It never was." Her words stung, but they were true. And for the first time in his life, Damien realized that wanting something didn't mean he deserved it. But still, he couldn't walk away. Not again. "I'm not asking for much," he said quietly. "Just a chance." Olivia hesitated, and for the first time in 7 years, Damien Carter was afraid. Because for the first time in his life, the decision wasn't his to make. Olivia's hesitation lasted only a moment, but to Damien, it felt like a lifetime. He could see the battle in her eyes, the way she was weighing every possibility, every risk. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about their son, a boy who had no idea that the man standing before his mother was the father he had never known. Finally, Olivia sighed, rubbing her temples, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on her. "I need time," she said. "I need to think." Damien nodded, understanding that he had no right to demand anything more. "I'll wait," he said. "As long as it takes." The next few days were agonizing. He went back to his penthouse, but for the first time, it felt empty, lifeless. The walls that once symbolized his success now only reminded him of everything he had lost. He found himself thinking about Olivia more than he ever had before. Not just as the woman he had left, but as the person he had taken for granted. She had raised their son alone, without any help from him. She had built a life from nothing, without the money and power he had once thought were everything. And yet, despite it all, she had done exactly what he had always wanted. She had given him an heir. But now, Damien realized, this wasn't about legacy. This wasn't about carrying on his name. This was about a child, a boy who deserved a father, and maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance to be one. Days turned into weeks, and just when Damien started to think Olivia had made up her mind to shut him out forever, he got a message, a single text. "Come meet him." His hands tightened around his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. He reread the message over and over again, as if trying to convince himself that this was real. He didn't waste a second. Within minutes, he was in his car, driving back to the quiet little neighborhood where his son lived. When Olivia opened the door, she looked calmer than she had in the cafe, but there was still a trace of hesitation in her eyes. "He doesn't know who you are," she said, her voice steady. I told him you were an old friend. Damien swallowed, nodding. He understood. This wasn't going to be easy for anyone. The moment he stepped inside, his gaze landed on the little boy sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by building blocks. Up close, the resemblance was even more undeniable. The dark eyes, the sharp jawline. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. Ethan, Olivia said gently. This is Damien. He used to be a friend of mine. The boy looked up, studying him with quiet curiosity. Hi, he said simply. Damien forced himself to breathe. He crouched down to the boy's level, offering a small smile. Hey, Ethan. His voice was softer than he had expected it to be. What are you building there? A castle, Ethan said proudly, lifting one of the blocks. It's gonna be huge. Damien felt something in his chest tighten. That's pretty cool. You know, when I was your age, I loved building things too. Ethan's eyes brightened with interest. Really? Really? Damien hesitated, then reached for a block. Maybe I can help. For a moment, the boy seemed to consider it. Then, with a small nod, he handed Damien a piece. You can build the tower. And just like that, Damien felt something shift. It wasn't much. It wasn't years of lost, time magically erased, but it was something, a beginning. Over the next few weeks, Damien visited often. At first, it was simple things. Helping Ethan with his projects. Listening to him talk about his favorite superheroes. Watching him play in the backyard. Slowly, the boy began to warm up to him, laughing at his jokes, asking him questions, treating him like someone who belonged. And all the while, Damien found himself changing in ways he never thought possible. One evening, as the sun set over Olivia's small backyard, Ethan ran inside to grab something, leaving Damien and Olivia alone. For the first time in hours, she crossed her arms, watching him carefully. You're good with him, she admitted. I didn't expect that. Damien exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Neither did I. Olivia hesitated before speaking again. I don't know what this means for the future, but he's happy. And that's what matters. Damien nodded. That's all I want, to be there, in whatever way you'll allow. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Then, Olivia sighed, a small, almost reluctant smile touching her lips. We'll see, she said. And for the first time in years, Damien felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope.